Cool. I hope you're enjoying this. We are on John chapter 2. Now, chapter 2 is when Jesus performs his first miracle. I want to remind you of a few things I said on the introduction, because remember, it all ties back. The gospel according to John was written in a sort of a chiastic way. So there are blocks, from one to this and from here to there. And the last portion, how the end relates to the start. It's a beautiful thing. I even have some observations. For example, when Jesus resurrects, he is seen for the first time in the garden as a gardener. And that blows my mind that the author of the gospel according to John is actually trying to show us that he's already concerned with the heavenly activities before he even gets to heaven, wherever heaven is. So that's, it's again, blows my mind. I have this message that I preached once about the correlation between Genesis, Proverbs, and Revelation. It's so crazy. But anyway, chapter 2 in the Gospel according to John is when he performs his first miracle. And one of the things I said during the introduction is that everything in the Gospel according to John is an affront to the Jewish tradition. So, first miracle, the whole of chapter 2 is about this wedding in Cana. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there are two steps to this. First one, they run out of wine. Second, water is turned into wine. So those two things are the things that you have to relate to. Why is that important? Because as the Jewish people hear this story that was written in the past, like an account that was taken, they will very likely remember how Moses turned water into blood. Remember the plagues in Egypt. Moses comes to Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go." And because God told me to let my people go. And one of the plagues is the water turns into blood, and then that blood is contaminated and all of that, the fish die, and that's a plague. So Jesus does the reverse. Like the miracle in Pentecost, for example, where everyone is speaking and understanding different languages, is the reverse of Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, when people are not understanding the language. Now here it's a reverse of that curse. So because water was turned into blood and it turned into death, now water, which in Hebrew culture, every time you see water, you relate to chaos, okay? So remember, in the beginning, God, and the earth was empty and it was chaotic, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. So in Hebrew culture, water represents chaos. So here's Jesus at a wedding, beautiful ceremony for the Jewish people. It takes days, right? You remember the parable of the virgins, for example. They were waiting for days until the bridegroom comes back. And it was the responsibility of the bridegroom's family to provide food and drinking. The Apostle Paul says it's not good for you to get drunk. You should drink a little bit of wine. It's good for your stomach, but don't get drunk with alcohol, but be full with the Holy Spirit. So that's a warning for the people who are getting drunk too often. But if there was one excuse, one time that the Jewish people could go all out, there was a wedding. Like a wedding for Jewish people, bro, go all out. That's their culture, all right? And right here, Jesus rocks up, probably one of his cousins or one of his close family, having a wedding. All of a sudden, news come to the kitchen. We ran out of wine. And if you ran out of wine in a Jewish wedding, it's time to finish the party. Party's over. Like we think about the supper, for example, it starts with bread, finishes with wine, where we get our idea from communion. In the Jewish household, when they give you the wine, it's time for you to go. Hey, here's the wine, drink the wine, go, come on, like dinner's over. So here the wine is over, and they're about to go, but the ceremony is still going. So they're going to be embarrassed. And they come to the kitchen and say, "We ran out of wine." So Jesus said, the mother of Jesus comes, and no one knows why. Some people attribute some extra power to Mary because she said, do whatever Jesus said. And Jesus turns to her and says, "Woman, my time is not come yet." And this is not disrespectful. We read it in English, woman, this time. But that's not what he means. He's just addressing her like a normal person, okay? There's nothing disrespectful about that in the Greek language. We got to be very careful when we try to say that Jesus was over his mouth. Nah, he wasn't. So right there in the wedding, she says, do what he says. And then Jesus is like, all right. So, but we got to remember at this time, None of the people in the party knew what was happening. No one. This is like a kitchen chaos. So Jesus says, you see the big barrels outside? Bring them in and fill them with water to the brim. Bring them in. So the disciples that were with him bring the barrels. Now, most people don't understand that, which I think is fascinating. But each one of those gallons had about 100 liters. Each one of those gallons. And there's about 3 of them, or 3 or 4 of them. I can't remember in the text. But there's we're talking about 300 liters of wine, right? It's a lot of wine. There's a lot of people. And if I'm exaggerating, a conservative figure will be about 100 liters of wine. That's conservative, okay? So they bring the water, and the beautiful thing is water, chaos, okay? Hebrew. So they would know when they read the story. The barrels that were outside, they were ceremonial barrels, and they were used to clean themselves before they eat. So they were dirty. So that's a sign get that thing that's messy and dirty and fill with chaos, and I'm going to show you what I am capable of doing. This is allegory, okay? This is Jewish allegory. It's not in the text, but the Jewish people would understand this. A first century Jewish person would understand this. Bring this to me because I am God, and you will see what I can do with your mess and with your chaos. I'll turn that into life. So Jesus goes, and there's no magic. Nothing happens. Just bring the water, and then, okay, now go serve. It's not like Jesus put a little cape over it and came back and said, ta-da, there's wine. No. It's just okay, bring the wine, bring the water. Now go serve. And then when they serve, the guy who's supposed to be the connoisseur in the party, tasting the wine, he goes ooh, this is good. This is expensive wine. Come on, who's this wine? So they call the bridegroom. They don't even call Jesus, which is beautiful because Jesus said it wasn't his time yet. In the Jewish tradition, most of the times they would serve the good wine, and when people get drunk, they would serve the bad wine. But here, the connoisseur tastes it and goes oh, this is good wine. So they call the bridegroom, and he says, look, you have served the last for the best. This is honorable. Thank you very much and all of that. But if you notice the vocabulary, this is what the author of the Gospel according to John is doing. He's preparing you for the end, the best for the last. Chapter 2 is a mirror to chapter 20, right? He's preparing because the wording is this: they called the bridegroom. Again, remember the virgin, the parable of the virgins? The bridegroom has arrived. So the bridegroom gets all the credit, all the merit. Your wine is perfect. Bro, he don't even know what's happening. He's just we got more wine. Someone brought more wine. All right, let's go. Let's party. Party time. Jesus silently walks out, and that's it. So chapter 2, there's a lot to be said there. I'm not going to go into more depth, but water, chaos. The barrels, ceremonial washing. The ceremonial washing of the Jewish turns into this beautiful life ceremony, which points again to, remember the Gospel of Matthew, you cannot have new wine in an old wineskin. So bring me the old way of doing things, and I'll show you the new way of doing things. And just like the fish and the loaves that he multiplied, we don't see the multiplication happening. They just keep serving, and it just keeps showing up. So that's how Jesus does things. So this is John chapter 2. Take the time to read it. Take the time to explore it. I would love for you to go even deeper on that. There's more resources in our community if you want to. Just go on pedroonpurpose.live/Philippians. You can choose how you're getting there. I don't want to promote that too much, but there's more resources there for you if you want to see the correlation between Old Testament and New Testament. Now we're going to go into one of my favorite passages, one of my favorite conversations, John chapter 3.